Hello and welcome to our today coffee and consulting event as a home office edition. My name is Frederike Roeg and I'm happy to speak to you now for the next couple of minutes about our today's topic, US expats. I hope you all have a cup of coffee or tea in front of you, and you can enjoy the next 15 to 30 minutes about US expats in Switzerland. Before we start, there are two matters I would like to draw your attention to. One is on the right-hand side, you find the slides. So you can download them while the presentation is ongoing. And the second thing is you can also ask us any questions or write us any questions there's a box on the right-hand side as well. And I will try to answer them then after the presentation, as we would have done in our coffee and consulting event at the main station. So let's start. We still, even the coronavirus is everywhere, we still have expats, and we will have still expats after the virus is hopefully combated. And for this presentation is, and we would like to go through the different aspects in this regard. In practice, we have, with US nationals or green card holders, because that is a special group of people, and you will see that why that is the case in a moment, we have lots of questions on a daily basis. Before we start with the theoretical part, I would like in the end to go through one practice case with you, to maybe make it a bit clearer what each aspects mean and what kind of outcome there is. The case is an US national will be assigned for 4 years to Switzerland for taking over the position of the managing director of the Swiss affiliated entity. His wife and the 2 children will join him. He will receive, in addition to his base salary, a housing allowance, the reimbursement of the moving cost, and the school cost for the children, as well as the cost for the tax return by his employer. So that is what he receives. He will be assigned from the US to Switzerland for a limited period of 4 years. We will see in the end then all the matters, what kind of solution there is and what you have to be careful about. What do we have to look, what kind of matters we have to look at when looking at expats usually, as well as in particular now US expats in Switzerland? From a Swiss point of view, whenever you have an assignment, you always have to look at the labor law, the work and residence permit, or the immigration law, all these social security aspects they might be coming into place, how the income is taxed or whether tax returns have to be filed, and how the income tax has to be declared. There are lots of different provisions in this regard you have to look at. As well as there are a couple of questions then about the payroll, how to run the payroll, what has to be imported in the payroll. It's a bit more tricky than just the usual local payroll. And on the other hand, in the other country, you have to look as well at the same matters, whether there is anything you need to consider as well. So if we have a US expat in Switzerland, we have to look at what kind of from a labor law, what labor law is applicable. Is it the US one or the Swiss one? And there, you may already know the answer from my side. It depends. It depends on the length. It depends on what the individual is doing in Switzerland, how the contract has been defined, and there are a lot of other things you have to look at, whether the labor law from the US is still applicable or the Swiss labor law as the country in which he is performing the work. So both have to be reviewed when you do an assignment contract or draft the local contract, whatever you think is the right thing in that regard. You have to look at both sides. From an immigration perspective, if you have an US national coming on assignment to Switzerland, then basically from an US immigration point of view, there's nothing you need to do. However, you will have to do something in Switzerland. You have to look at what kind of work permit has to be requested, what is the procedure. You have to look at the registration in the end in Switzerland, what has to be done in that regard, as well as what happens with the family. Now, US expats in Switzerland, if there's somebody coming just from the US, but maybe is not US national, but from a different country, then as well you have to consider the immigration law in the US for that individual. We have from time to time cases where, for example, the employee is already coming to Switzerland, but the family is still remaining at home. And usually the family is, if they have not the nationality of the country they are currently living, they have dependent permits on the employee. And therefore, sometimes that is then a bit tricky how to best actually navigate through the circumstances to get the family and as well either remaining then still in the home country or having them then starting earlier to come to Switzerland. Social Security and taxation, we will come back in a moment in a bit more detail. From the Social Security as well as taxation point of view, we have not only to look at the national laws from each country, but there's also then the Social Security treaty we have between Switzerland and the US, or the double tax treaty, which we have between both countries. So that has to be considered in addition to the national legal provisions. Regarding payroll, which is sometimes a bit of a nightmare or can be a nightmare. However, what you just have to look at is where does he get, or where does the assignee expat gets the salary paid out, whether he remains, if being assigned to Switzerland, remains in the Social Security in the US, or whether he actually is not remaining there, but switching over to the Swiss system. And then as well, you also have to look at, in case you will pay out the salary from the US, you have to see that the US has a certain tax deduction requirement. So for any days in the end, he might have to get back to the US and work there for a day or 2 days or whatever. There is still the US taxes to be deducted directly from the pay. So in this regard, you might have to keep a payroll in the US. From a payroll perspective, we usually say that the actual payroll is always the payroll where the salary is paid out. In most of the cases I have seen for US expats, it's usually that US expats want to get the salary paid out in the US. Therefore, in the US is usually then really the payroll running, and in Switzerland, then usually is only a kind of shadow payroll, which we need above all for the tax at source deductions, but also in case somebody switches to the Swiss social security system for the Swiss social security contributions so that they are deducted. The mentioning of that it could get or can be a nightmare is because both payrolls in the end need to have all the same information, and they need to make sure that everything has been going through their payroll, like any kind of payments, either if it's paid in the end through the bookkeeping in Switzerland or the US. So the communication between both parties has to be very good. Sometimes we see that mistakes are made because from a tax perspective, the one or the other element of compensation might be taxable, and then there will be assumptions made that it's also then subject to Social Security. But that is not the case. So you have to really look at each element separately and then define or determine by either the Swiss tax law or the US tax law or the Swiss Social Security law or the US Social Security law, whether it is subject to either of these taxation or Social Security contributions. And that makes it quite difficult. In regard to Social Security, as said, we do have a Social Security treaty between the US and Switzerland. The Social Security treaty itself only covers the AHV and IV, so meaning the governmental retirement security, and is not covering all the other matters like the pension fund, the unemployment insurance, accident insurance, health insurance. However, the US understanding as well as the Swiss understanding is that in case somebody can be insured in the governmental Social Security, then all the other Social Security matters like unemployment insurance, pension fund, accident insurance, and so on shall be covered as well, even it is not indicated in the Social Security Treaty. And therefore, you usually see that if you have an assignee or an expat from the US to Switzerland, what happens is that the US company gets for him the certificate of coverage, and in Switzerland you just need that document in the end to make sure that you have not to pay any Swiss Social Security contributions. What you also have to look at is that the health insurance, and that is something special in Switzerland, you need to file an application for exemption from the health insurance in Switzerland, because the health insurance is something private in Switzerland, and for that you do have to request the exemption. If you don't do it, you usually have 3 months to do that. If you don't do that, then the government will automatically enroll the individual in the health insurance in Switzerland. And there are some cantons or communes which are quite quick with that and quite strict as well. And some are a bit more understanding as well, that sometimes to get the certificate of coverage is not just taking a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's even taking 5 to 6 months. And that was even before the today's situation, where it even takes much longer. What you need to know as well is in the US and Swiss Social Security Treaty, all nationals are covered. So it doesn't matter what kind of nationality your assignee is, everybody can be covered under that treaty. The exemption from the Social Security liability in the host country and remaining in the home country, meaning somebody can remain in the US as his home country and can be exempted from the Social Security liability in the host country as Switzerland. That can be for a maximum period of 5 years, and that is guaranteed in the treaty. But there's also the possibility of extension. Usually the extension is for up to another year. Now, we had also cases in where, with very valid reasons, that we can get it extended for even up to 7 years, but that was maybe like one case was where somebody was then getting retired in the 7th year, and therefore it didn't make any sense to have him then switched over to the Swiss system just for 1 year. However, there's no guarantee on it, but still, if you have a situation like this, or maybe there are the one or the other very valid reason why he should be still remaining in the home country system, then you just have to request that and then see what the decision is from the authority. From a tax point of view, there we now have to make a difference between what kind of national we look at. Not so much from a Swiss perspective, but from a US perspective. As just said in the Social Security, it doesn't matter what kind of nationality the individual is or the family is. However, from a tax point of view, it makes a difference. And the difference is in the US, where you may have already seen or realized that a US national or green card holder is remaining tax liable in the US as long as he has his citizenship or the green card. You can revoke the green card and you can re-announce the US citizenship, and then you can avoid the US taxation, but until you do so, you still have to pay US taxation, as well as you have to file certain tax returns. If we have an assignment from the US to Switzerland, then before I come to the US perspective, we just look quickly on the Swiss side. From a Swiss point of view, it is if somebody is assigned for more than these 183 days in a calendar year, then the individual gets the latest taxable in Switzerland. The 183 days are only playing a role in certain assignments or certain situations. Sometimes even the tax liability starts from the first day. So if you have an assignment for example, for 4 years, then definitely the taxation will start from the first day, depending as well then on a couple of other elements. In principle, there's the tax at source deduction to be made from the Swiss entity where the employee is working at. There are only a couple of scenarios where no tax at source has to be deducted. That is usually if there is no real legal entity from the employer abroad in Switzerland, so that there is no deduction possible in the end. The taxatures usually comprise the cantonal and communal as well as the federal income tax. However, you still have to file a tax return in case of, in Zurich, for example, and in most of the German-speaking cantons, it is if somebody has a salary of more than 120,000 Swiss francs a year, then a tax return filing is required. There are a couple of cantons which have different numbers, like, for example, Geneva. In Geneva, you only have to file a tax return if the income is above 500,000 Swiss francs. So you have to look in the end in which canton somebody is living, what are the applicable rules. In Switzerland, we do pay then in the end income tax as well as asset tax, which has then to be done through the tax return, which everybody has then to file. For U.S. national or green card holders, as said, they remain still subject to income tax. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they really have to pay taxes in the U.S. What is more to be looked at is that they do have certain tax return filings. Now, one is they have to file a U.S. tax return for federal tax purposes, and this really everybody has to do, even if in the end there is zero taxes to be paid. The filing deadline itself is the 15th of June, which is basically 2 months longer than for all the U.S. Nationals or for everybody living in the U.S. because there the tax filing is the 15th of April. So for people living outside of the U.S., it's the 15th of June, and then that can be extended until the 15th of October. In some states, there is still, in addition, a tax return filing from a state tax point of view. So you will have to check whether that is applicable in the case of your U.S. expat. Now, you might be aware that the U.S. has just not one tax return to file. There are a couple of other things, and there are two major reportings which each expat has to look at, and they are, in the end, quite essential penalties in case they don't do, and that is the FBAR filing, which is basically for foreign bank accounts. Everybody has to file that reporting in case they have a bank balance on a foreign bank account of more than 10,000 Swiss francs. That bank account can also be a pension fund, or, for example, if somebody pays into the Pillar 3A while being in Switzerland, and that gets over $10,000, then in that scenario, they also have to declare that bank account. In addition, the FACTA Act, you may also have maybe heard of. It's basically going in the same way. There's the reporting of all the bank accounts and any share and any deposit you have, and you have to advise your expats that they should take care of it, because the penalties are quite huge. Looking at that, basically it's just a kind of reporting. Now, we do have a double tax treaty between Switzerland and the US, and the idea is that nobody should get any income double getting taxed in both countries. In order to avoid this, and now seeing that a US national has still to report his income in the US, there are three drivers the US tax law knows in this regard. One is the foreign tax credit, one is the foreign earned income exclusion, and one is the foreign housing exclusion. And these are the three main triggers how to reduce the tax liability in the US. And in most scenarios or most cases, it's even with the result that there is zero taxes or really minimal taxation on it. I just want to say a couple of words to it. The foreign tax credit you usually use in case the assignment is going to a higher tax country. So Switzerland is there not the right country in this regard, but if there is a higher taxation than in the US, you would use the foreign tax credit. And basically it is really the taxes you paid in the other country can be just credited one by one, more or less one by one, towards the US taxes. There is, as always in taxes, there is a quite difficult calculation behind, but basically it only is the right way to reduce the taxes if really the taxes are higher than in the US. Usually what you will see for US expats coming to Switzerland, that they first use the foreign earned income exclusion as well as the foreign housing exclusion to reduce their income. The foreign earned income exclusion is in 2020 the maximum of $107,600. If there is then any additional income still, then you can see whether with the foreign housing exclusion, and there is a table from the US law, you can determine in the end city by city what is the maximum amount of that foreign housing exclusion, and then can deduct this as well. And then, in addition to all of that, there are still the usual deductions, like personal deductions or items possible to reduce the taxation as best as possible. From a Swiss point of view, I said there is an expat audience as well, which is not just for US expats to Switzerland, but for all expats coming to Switzerland. The authorities are getting a bit stricter in this regard, and the conditions for which we can apply it is for management employees or specialists, and for any assignment from those two categories for a period of up to 5 years. Starting from the 6th year on, it's not any longer possible. Some cantons even started then, if the assignment goes longer than 6 years, to look at the years before and maybe even then add up the one or the other deduction which had been made based on that expat audience. So you have to be careful if you have an assignment longer than 5 years, what the cantonal tax authorities are doing then. Basically, the expat audience intends to say that for somebody assigned to Switzerland for up to 5 years, each month there is a lump sum deduction of 1,500 Swiss francs, and with that everything is good. So 1,500 Swiss francs can be used basically without any kind of proof. Now, in case you do want to have a higher deduction, you have to prove basically everything. And there is then the difference to be made between people still keeping their residence abroad. Like if we look at the case from the US, if somebody still remains with his family in the US but will be working more or less maybe during the year here in Switzerland, maybe every month, then going back for 1 week or something like this to the US. For those people, then only the travel cost as well as the rent for the apartment can be deducted. So if we want to deduct the effective cost, we need to prove the travel cost as well as the rent here in Switzerland. Or we can just deduct the 1,500 Swiss francs per month. In case now the whole family or the employee will move to Switzerland and won't keep his residence abroad, then in addition to the rent for the apartment in Switzerland, the moving cost for moving, as well as the travel cost at the beginning of the assignment as well as at the end, can be deducted. And the school fees for the children. Now, what you have to look at is in the German-speaking part, basically, the school cost will only be possible to deduct if the kids are non-German-speaking children. And if we go to Ticino, to the Italian-speaking part, it's for non-Italian-speaking children, and in the French part for non-French-speaking children. So if in case you do have a German national coming to Switzerland, but maybe the kids have never been living in Germany, but they do have a German passport, you may not be able to deduct the school fees in the tax return. This is basically the theoretical part about the expat situation. Now, getting back to our case, and here is the solution which we would like to provide you as well. The individual was assigned for 4 years, we said, from the US to Switzerland, and he is moving with the whole family to Switzerland. Based on the fact that he is US national, we definitely have to request a work and residence permit in Switzerland. As it is an assignment, we don't need to show any job search or anything. Basically, the application can be filed for the assignment for a period for up to 60 months. And that is based on immigration law. What we have to show, however, is that the employee is a specialist or a management employee, or at least has a university degree plus at least 3 years of work experience. If he is meeting these requirements, then there should be no problem at all to get the work and residence permit. The most important part is that if you assign somebody to Switzerland, you always have to make sure that you meet the Swiss salary level, as well as that you pay these additional allowances for food, for apartment, and for the traveling. Now, you may have heard already or seen that starting from 1st of April this year, the authority have decided that these additional allowances for food, travel, and the apartment have only to be paid for up to 12 months. So only for the first 12 months that has to be paid, and then starting from the 13th month onwards, an employer has not to pay that any longer. So if you have now new assignees, and that has nothing to do just with US assignees, you should make sure that in your assignment contracts or also in the assignment policy, you maybe make that differentiation. When we file then the application, it usually takes up to 3 months. Usually it will be reviewed by the Labour Market Authority, the federal authority, and then there's the final approval which you receive. Based on the final approval, then the employee and the family have to claim the entry visa from abroad, and then can enter Switzerland. What also has changed, but has changed already last year, is for the, in this case, for the wife of the employee who is also U.S. national. She basically has now to get enrolled in Switzerland in a local Swiss or in a local language school to get the A1 certificate for German language. And this is a requirement from the authority. If the spouse will not get enrolled, we basically will not get an entry visa or the approval for an entry visa for Switzerland. Now, if somebody gets enrolled and we get the entry visa, but in the end the spouse is not taking the lessons, and when we file then the extension after 1 year, she cannot show that she has been attending the lessons, she might not get the extension approved, and therefore might have to even leave the country. We had already, because a couple of other cantons have already used that integration part since 4 or 5 years, like for example Canton Schaffhausen, Canton Basel. And they had, we had 2 or 3 cases where we had difficulties because the spouses thought that is not necessary, they don't want to learn German. And in the end, the authority said, as long as you don't do it, you don't attend the school, we are not extending your permits. So if you are in contact with the expats, make sure you tell them they really have to go and attend the classes and then get the that certificate so that an extension is not a problem. The process itself usually takes about 2 to 3 months. At the moment, you are aware that there is no application we can file, and we won't get at the moment any work permit for an U.S. national. There is as well until the 15th of June that there will be no visa issued for U.S. nationals. So at the moment, in case you have somebody coming from the U.S. To Switzerland, maybe in the next few months, think about that. The process might take longer, and that somebody might only be able to start in about end of August, September, or even October. In the beginning, I already said a couple of words in regard to the labor law. In principle, if you assign somebody from the US to Switzerland, in principle, the US labor law will be applicable. However, there are a couple of mandatory Swiss legal provisions which also have to be considered. One is about the working hours, holidays, and one of the things you definitely know is the Swiss salary level. So there are a couple of others which have to be looked at as well. And there is no way you cannot consider it. Depending now on the length of the assignment and the way you have drafted the assignment, it might be even that the US labor law is completely not applicable any longer, and it switches totally and only to the Swiss labor law. But that depends really on the case. Looking at the tax part, from a tax point of view, we do have the double tax treaty in place. However, the family moves to Switzerland, so in Switzerland is their main residence, or the center of their living, and therefore there is also the unlimited tax liability, meaning the worldwide income and worldwide assets have to be taxed in Switzerland. The tax return filing is there to be looked at in case the individual, and most likely that is the situation, he will earn more than 120,000 Swiss francs and he will come to Zurich, then he has to file the tax return. We have to consider or can consider the expat audience, and in this regard, for him, the moving cost basically from the US to Switzerland can be paid tax-free in case it's really the effective cost will be paid, as well as then when he returns to the US, that can be paid or reimbursed also tax-free. The school cost for the two children, as well as the effective housing cost. Now, if you may remember, there was also that the individual gets the cost for the tax return preparation paid. This is something which is not tax-free. So even if the employer pays for it, the cost for the tax advisor is a taxable benefit and has to be added in the compensation. Due to the fact that he is U.S. national, as well as his wife is U.S. national and the kids, there is the tax return filing, and there needs to be looked at in the end in the U.S. how to best minimize the taxable income. So to see with using most likely the foreign earned income exclusion as well as the foreign housing exclusion to minimize it as best as possible. From a Social Security point of view, they can remain in the US system because they are only assigned for 4 years. So there is no problem for him to fear to get covered in the Swiss system. Based on the understanding from the US administration as well as from the Social Security Administration, all the Social Security departments are covered, so there are no liability in Switzerland. But as said earlier already, make sure that there is the filing of the exemption from the US from the Swiss health insurance. Otherwise, he will end up being covered with the family, and he will be end up covered in the Swiss system. What you also have to look at is really the health insurance coverage, because there sometimes the coverage, if it's just the state health insurance from the US, this is not sufficient for Switzerland. So there you may want to look at how best to have him covered, that nothing, that there are no additional surprises. From a payroll perspective, he gets his salary paid out in the US, and Social Security contributions shall be paid in the US. So in the US there will be the payroll being run, and then in Switzerland there needs to be the shadow payroll for the tax at source deductions. If you consider all these different aspects and look at it, then you have basically solved the case quite easily. This was also the short overview about US expats in Switzerland. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I haven't seen any questions now from your end, but maybe I have answered already everything. If not, you can still write and in an email later on and send us the question in case there is any from you. The last minute, I would like to just draw your attention to our other events in the upcoming weeks. What we started is, and basically started from tomorrow, is that we have kind of a global mobility and corona virus series. So it will always just be for one of the topics we currently have in global mobility, which is a bit special due to the new situation. We will provide a short presentation of it, and then it should give you also then the opportunity to really ask any questions you have in this regard, and we will answer them then live. As well, in the next few weeks, there is one webinar just really about immigration challenges in Switzerland, which is on the 2nd of April, and that is also in English. And then the other English webinar we will have is about business travelers in Switzerland and work permits for business visa, which is taking place on the 28th of May. As said, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope we can see you at one of the other webinars or events in the next few weeks. And I hope you all are safe and healthy, and I wish you a great week. Bye.